everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel and welcome to my 4K Q&A. So I am really amazed and still surprised that I've even hit 4K subscribers. So thank you very much to everyone who is subscribed to my channel, who watches my videos, who interacts with them. And even if you don't, interact with them, thank you for just, being here and occasionally picking up and watching a video when you feel like it. My channel has evolved significantly over the time that I have been on BookTube. I've been on here for and even just on YouTube, it's been a very, very long journey. And it didn't always start out as a BookTube channel, which those of you who've been around for a while will know. But I have been on BookTube for 8 or 9 years now. So it's been a long time. And I'm just very grateful for everyone who follows and, joins in every now and then with sort of the conversations that I'm having. And thank you to everyone who did send in some questions. I'm going to go through them in no particular order. And yeah, we'll see how we go. And the first one from the Librarian of Alexandria, Home and Away or Neighbours? Honestly, neither. But when I was growing up, my family very much was a Home and Away family. So we just watched that every night. I could not tell you anything about it. It was more my sister's thing than my own, but we were definitely a Home and Away family. Naomi Lily White 3236 said, I'd love to know if you get any book boxes, especially Australian ones, or if you'd prefer to just purchase the books that you specifically want to read, and where you most often buy them from, in person or online. I love a good book box, but I'm often kind of disappointed by the book choices. So I have tried a few Australian book box services, and I think I've got a video where I tried a bunch of them, like Bookbox AU, Romance, Cartel. Oh, there's another one I've mentally blanked on the name of. Anyway, I'll leave the video linked on the screen. I am currently subscribed to Romance Cartel's Literati subscription, which is a special edition book plus 1 or 2 other small items. And the only reason I have been subscribed to them in the past. I unsubscribed and then I resubscribed because they're doing a special edition of the first book in the Puck Boys series by Eden Finley and Saxon James. And I love that series. So I signed up again for that. I have since skipped this new month's book just because I wasn't interested in it. And I'm kind of hoping they do the rest of the CU hockey universe, and then I'll probably purchase those books. And then I'll kind of see month by month what it is that they're actually putting out, as to whether or not I do continue with the subscription. Honestly, I mostly prefer to choose my own books, mostly because I know my reading taste and I prefer not to leave that up to somebody else to decide what I might like. If I need something fairly quickly, I do tend to get it from Amazon, but I do love to go browse in bookstores. That's one of my favorite things to do. 2 of my favorite bookstores are Dymocks in the city in Melbourne. It's just a really awesome store. I don't tend to get my romance books from there just because I'm not the biggest fan of traditionally published romances in general, and they tend to have, lots of the same authors that I just don't read. But I actually really like going there and browsing their sci-fi fantasy section, and also their children's section and their poetry section. And then the other store I like to go to is Readings Kids in Carlton, because it's a purely kids bookstore and that's just like my happy place. Viv Ram asked, what is the book or series that got you into reading, and what book or series specifically got you into romance? So I have done a full video on my reading history or my reading timeline. I'll leave that link down below. There are kind of different stages, and I talked about this in that specific video, where I've gone through different stages and evolutions in my reading. So in primary school, it probably would have been the Tomorrow When the War Began series. That's one of the few books I can remember clearly reading back then. There was also in high school, I picked up Jurassic Park, and that was a massive thing for me. Again in high school, but this time in year 9, Ice Station by Matthew Reilly. I went through a Star Wars phase and a high fantasy phase. And then when I started teaching, I kind of dropped off from a lot of my reading until I then picked it up again because of BookTube. And the romance book that probably got me into the genre was The Hating Game. I had read various other books in the romance genre before then, but I think just the timing of when I read The Hating Game and the fun that I had with it, and the fact that it was recommended to me by a friend, probably is what set me starting down a bit of a spiral into finding out more about the romance genre and what was available. So we'll go with The Hating Game. CG317 asks, have you tried the Fable app for reading tracking yet? No, because I currently have way too many things that I'm tracking my reading on, and I do not have the capacity for more. So I'm still currently on Goodreads. I am on Storygraph. I also have my reading spreadsheet and I have my reading journal. If you ask me which of any of those I prefer the most, it is my own reading spreadsheet, but having an online space where I can find the information I need for my reading spreadsheet is really useful. I have thoughts about Goodreads versus Storygraph and things like that as well, but I don't really have the capacity or just the brain capacity to add another tracking app into there, because it's a lot. It's a lot. All right, then Natalia has a bunch of questions. So the first one is a video request, which is a video to see me talking more about rereading, which I will add that to the list hopefully this month or next month. So stay tuned. What's my favorite classic? I'm not a huge classics reader for lots of different reasons. I can never get through them. I suppose the one classic that's maybe not a children's classic that I really enjoyed the reading experience of was Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. I remember we did this sort of as a read along on my channel maybe 5 or 6 years ago. This was an attempt for me to try and get through that because I'd always wanted to read it, and I'm just so apprehensive with classics. So apprehensive. But I really enjoyed the reading experience, so I suppose it has to be up there as a favorite classic, just because it was one that I got through, but also that I enjoyed while I was reading it. Can I remember a book that had a huge impact on me, or the first book that had a huge impact on me? It's kind of a coin toss between Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton and Ice Station by Matthew Reilly. Jurassic Park, it was a book that got me through a time in my early teenage life where I was really stuck and I was in a new school in a new state. I didn't have a large group of friends, and I would spend a lot of time in the library, and that's where I found the book. And so it has really special meaning for me in that way. I also really love the book. I think the book is great. If you love the movie, I highly recommend you read the book. It is a little bit more science heavy in the book, science and maths heavy in the book. And I like that about it because even though I'm not a math science brain, it still made a lot of sense to me. And then I went on to read The Lost World, which I actually think is better than Jurassic Park. And then again, Ice Station by Matthew Reilly, because it was a book that I was totally not expecting to find in my library when I moved back to Melbourne. I was in year 9 again, sort of struggling in that trying to make friend space, being the new kid, spending a lot of time in the library. But I found that book, I inhaled that book. It's not a short book, it's over 400 pages long, but I inhaled it. It is an action movie in a book. And then I basically went back and just read everything that I could by Matthew Reilly. And at that point, he only had 1 or 2 other books out. I think it was Temple and Contest. And then later that year, Area 7 came out, and I begged for it for Christmas, and my parents got it for me, and I stayed up that night and I read that book cover to cover. I didn't go to bed till like 2 o'clock in the morning. Those 2 books, have a really special place in my heart. Have they aged well? Probably not, but you know what? It doesn't matter because they're nostalgic for me. What's your favorite animal character? I don't really know. Honestly, animals don't necessarily stand out for me in books. I suppose if I was going children's books recently, 2 characters that stand out for me, oh gosh, do I have them here, is Floof by Heidi McKinnon, which is about a very adorable but very cheeky cat, and also Oh No George, who is a very lovable dog who also can't help but get up into mischief. And so I like mischievous but lovable animals. My top 3 fantasy books. So I don't read a lot of straight up fantasy anymore. When I was reading fantasy, which was in my late teens, I probably would have said Magician by Raymond Feist, Battleaxe by Sarah Douglas, and maybe Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marillier. They were the ones that I was reading back then. And then can I eat and read at the same time? It depends on what it is that I'm eating. If it's something like chips or crackers or something like that, that's fine. If you're talking about a full-on meal, the only time I can do that is if I'm reading on my phone, and it's usually when I'm out eating by myself. I just want to have something to read, so I feel less weird about eating. I don't know. I shouldn't feel weird about eating out at restaurants by myself, but I had to do it a lot over the weekend. And every time I did it, I just kind of had a book going on my phone. So I was eating and reading, but I can't physically hold a book and eat a proper meal. And that's mostly just a juggling thing. Like I need to have the space to do that, and I typically don't. Grace Anderson 1685 says, what are your favorite tropes and themes in books? I love good romance. I love a small town romance. I love a forced proximity or an only one bed situation. Snowed In is also a great offshoot of that forced proximity trope. I love a morality chain. I mean, I love a hockey romance, but I also want there to be actual hockey in the book. So if it's just that it's a hockey player, I mean, it can still be a good book. But if there's no actual sport in a sports romance, what's the point? Like, I want to know about, how they interact with other players in their team, or how the sport works, or how constant traveling affects relationships, or even just the mundane, sort of day-to-day things like equipment and costs and things like that. Like that, to me, if you're going to have a sports romance or anything that heavily involves a profession, I want the details. I don't know why. It's just me. Like, most people don't care. I do care. Tracy Anderson asked, what is your favorite place to buy books in Melbourne? Dymocks or Readings Kids. I love those 2 stores. But that said, I also really like going on the walking tour of the City of Literature, which means I go to all of the indie bookstores like Hill of Content, the Paperback Bookshop, things like that. I don't go to them all the time. They're just a little bit further out of the way. Like Dymocks is a lot easier for me to get to. For anyone who's in Melbourne, I know they're very close, but you have to walk up the hill for 2 of them. I'd rather just go straight to Dymocks than out. That's just me. But yeah, when I have the opportunity to go for a wander, I do like going to visit all of the different stores. I mean, I think we're really lucky here. I would love an independent romance store in Melbourne. that would be nice. Corrine asks, what are your thoughts about the community aspect of Storygraph? I honestly don't have any, and that's because I don't spend a lot of time on Storygraph. I also don't spend a lot of time on Goodreads. I tend to use Goodreads primarily because my Kindle automatically connects to Goodreads and it pulls all my data from Amazon because, you know, they're all owned because Amazon is that big evil corporation, right? There are benefits to that in terms of the fact that I don't have time to constantly pour data over. And I've talked about this before. I have issues with Storygraph because Storygraph has flat out refused to import any of my data from Goodreads. When I first got a Storygraph account, and I got one really early, I had everything, it refused to import it. Now I can't do that. And I'm over that frustration. But the other thing that I find frustrating is that it doesn't automatically pull my data. So I have to go manually add things. And you might go, it's easy, there's the app and whatever, and it's an easier interface. The interface, yes, is easier, but I also find it there's a lot more steps involved in Storygraph. Consider that constructive feedback. It's not that I don't like it. I actually do. I think the user interface is good. I think it's very clean. I think the information you get from it is fantastic, but I have to manually input everything. So that's annoying. Goodreads, on the other hand, is not user-friendly, but I think it's a lot easier to see information from people. I think it's a lot easier to find people that you know on Goodreads. But if I'm honest, I don't really interact very much at all in any of the community aspects on there because I'm already interacting so much with the community on YouTube, on Instagram. And like I said before, like I have to draw the line somewhere at what I can physically do because I work full-time. I have a full-time job and my full-time job is exhausting. So when I come home, I just want to read. I don't want to have to try and manage so many other things and other platforms. So I don't know. I don't really have thoughts on the community aspect because I don't use it. Maybe that makes me a bad member of the book community, but I think I have to choose my battles and pick where and when I interact with people. Isabeau asked, what made you decide to start making YouTube videos and how did you get into reading indie romance? So 2 questions. So the first one is I started making YouTube videos because I was making beauty box unboxings way back when. Then I got into the planner community and also some DIY crafty stuff. And then eventually I stumbled across BookTube and then I went, well, you know what? I've always been a reader, but I go through lulls and I haven't read in a while. I bought a stack of books because of BookTube. A lot of them were young adult, a lot of them were sci-fi books. And then I started reading them like, well, I want to talk about them. So I started talking about them and it kind of spiraled from there. When I make up my mind to do something, I tend to just do it. And I'm like, well, I'm already making videos. I'm already talking to cameras. Why not just talk about books? Because I'm enjoying them. And I got into reading indie romances because I started watching more romance booktubers and they were talking about Kindle Unlimited. They were talking about indie romances and that kind of sparked my interest in that I was finding books that I was really interested in reading. And it's just kind of gone from there. Super Astor asks, how has having an online presence affected your reading? I'd be lying if I said it didn't. I mean, if I want to continue my presence, I kind of have to at least stay aware of what's going on with books. I don't necessarily have to read, but I have to, you know, be aware of things that are happening. But the fact is my reading has significantly increased and a lot of that is internal. I use reading as a way of sort of debriefing and settling my brain after a really busy day at work. During the pandemic and the lockdowns, it was a way to occupy my time, but also to connect with other people who are reading the same things. And it's kind of spiraled from there. But I've always been a reader. So now it's just a case of me actually being aware of how much I read, what I want to read, when I want to read more, when I don't want to read more. So yeah, it definitely has had an effect. If anything, it's been really positive in the fact that I have found way more authors that I'm interested in reading, way more genres that I'm interested in reading. I have more access to information about the books that I want to read. I'm also really good at going, yeah, I don't want to read that at all. And I think that's probably one of the best things that's come out of having an online presence is being aware of what is out there, what I want to read and what I don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. All right, the next question is, what is your favorite genre and book in that genre? I mean, this is a hard one. I don't like picking a favorite genre. I read predominantly romance, so that is a favorite, but then romance has so many subgenres and then there would be favorites within there. I also consider myself, even though I don't read it all that often anymore, I consider myself a sci-fi reader. I've long since dropped the fantasy reader title because I'm not interested in going into high fantasy as much anymore. I'm also a kids reader, and that in itself also opens up more avenues because there's so many different things that you can read within the kids genre. If we're talking romance, if you wanted me to hand on heart say which is my favorite book that I have read in the last 5-6 years that I've been a romance reader, it's The Rest of the Story by Bauer. That will surprise absolutely no one. I think it is a really well-crafted story. It is queer. It is a hockey romance, but it is about so much more than all of those things. The romance in it is top tier and it will break your heart in the best possible way, but also the story of a team having to put themselves together after really traumatic events and how they band together as a group is just also something that will tear your heart out and is just beautifully done. If we're talking science fiction, probably The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. I haven't reread it in a while, but that is a book that really strongly stands out in my memory as something that I absolutely adore and love, and I still have to do my reread of it this year, so I'll probably be talking about it again soon. Ileana has asked, would you consider doing a live? Well, thank you for wanting to hang out with me and talk books. I used to do lives all the time. The thing that's been really difficult in the last 2 years, particularly since we've come back from lockdown, is one, I'm really tired after work each week. I'm also limited by the Australian time zones and when that is appropriate for other people, because at the moment it's early in the, like if I was to do a live that most people could attend, it's early in the morning, but for half the year it's like in the middle of the day on the weekend, which is really challenging in terms of being able to organise the rest of my life around that. And also during our hockey season over here, which runs from April until August, there are a lot of weekends where we have double header weekends and things like that. So it's not possible. But yes, I do want to do more lives. I'm going to try and do some lives for the Australian Readathon. I know we're going to try and do a live on Heather's channel for journaling, which I think might have already happened. I will try and get back into it. It just has to work around my schedule. And it's a lot easier to do that in term breaks than it is during the term, but that does mean that I go like 2.5 months without being able to consider doing a live show. We are also going to be doing a live show for Sanctuary, which is the new Ilona Andrews book that is Raymond's story that's coming out at the end of July. So that will be on my channel at some point as well in August. All right, and then all of these last questions come from Heather from Here Booktube. So Heather asked, what was my first romance book? And I'm pretty sure it was well, the first one that I can actually remember was a straight up romance, was probably a NetGalley arc. I think it was called Off Base by Annabeth Albert. It was a queer military romance, and I kind of remember why I requested it. Anyway, I read it. I did really enjoy it. I like Annabeth Albert's writing style. She does write queer romances or queer romances. The thing that I enjoy about her writing is, and I've continued to read her books since then, the thing that I really enjoy about what she does is that she does look at different queer identities. So while she does write romance pretty much exclusively, there's a lot of different representation within there and a lot of different dynamics. And for someone who at that point didn't really know about the extended LGBTQIA plus alphabet, I learnt a lot through her books that then inspired me to go out and read more. I'm probably going to go with that one. And then she asked, what is my favourite thing to introduce to non-Aussies? If it's not food, then it's probably language and just slang and cultural stuff. I don't tend to consider myself like a stereotypical Australian in terms of what international people would expect me to say or sound like. I know I have an Australian accent and I can't imagine what that sounds like to anyone else because it's just the way that I've always spoken. But I feel like when I'm talking on the camera, I don't always use a lot of Australian slang. I do tend to use it in my real life. I think I just lapse into it because I've heard it growing up and I hear it around me. And so when I'm around Australians, I will have slang and colloquialisms and things like that in my general conversation. But for the most part, it's not until someone asks and then I'll start spouting off something and most people go, what do you mean? What are you even talking about? So I don't know. I think language I think is fun, and I think it's always fun to introduce people to, new ways of using language in different parts of the world. Then she asked, what is your favorite type of paranormal? And now I've had this question for a while and I probably should have asked her what she meant by paranormal. I love a really good blend of urban fantasy and paranormal romance. I think you get more world building in an urban fantasy, and if you get both mixed together in a paranormal romance, it's excellent. Like Kate Daniels is the perfect example of that, in that you get a lot of world building, but you also get a really awesome long-standing relationship. If we're talking about paranormal creatures in books, probably shifters. I think you can do some really fun things with shifters. I think the dynamics can be really interesting. I also really like angel books, but I just don't find enough good ones. And that has eternally been my bugbear, is that I cannot find really good angel paranormal romances that I really want more of. Heather, if I interpreted this question incorrectly, please let me know down below and I'll reply properly. The next question is, what is my favorite tea? Technically my favorite tea is not one that I can get, I can't get from the place that I used to get it from, which was a Turkish apple tea, which is more like a tisane, so it's like a dissolvable, mostly sugar, flavoured sugar tea, but it was delicious. If we're just going regular tea that I drink most often, it is peppermint tea. I am a peppermint tea fiend. I think it is a very all-purpose kind of tea. And then I also have another one from T2 that I like, which is called Buddha's Tears, which is a mix of jasmine and green tea, but they come in the little rolled up tea leaf balls that you just put in the cup and they just open up, and it's delicious. The next question is, when did I transition my channel to books? I should be better at keeping the dates for these things. I think, hang on, let's work it out. It was probably around 2016 or 2017. I've been on BookTube for a while. Yeah, as I said earlier, it was just because I fell into the BookTube community and thought, well, I can talk about books, so let's talk about books. And for a while, I sort of had parallel content running. So I had planner content and book content until I phased out the majority of the planner content, and now I only just do it sporadically. All right, so the next question is, if you could recommend one picture book for parents to buy, what would it be? All the Ways to Be Smart by Davina Bell and Alison Colpoys. This is a really great book exploring that smart isn't just academic smarts, it's about all of the strengths that people have. It is a really gorgeous book. I love the color in it. There's also another one that they have called Under the Love Umbrella, which is a great way for exploring the connection that people have. But yeah, anything by these two I think is a really good starting place, because I think it has great opportunities for parents to remind their children that it's okay if reading is not your thing or if maths isn't your thing, but these are your strengths. These are the things that you do so well that you bring into the world that are positive things that will stand you in good stead. So I love this book. And yes, that was really hard to choose one book, but I do think that that is a really great one, and it's one I typically buy for anyone who has a baby. If you could recommend one graphic novel for parents to buy, what would it be? I don't know. I do read a lot of graphic novels for kids, but I don't feel like I'm super well versed in them. If I'm thinking about what I've read recently, probably the one that I think probably has the most impact if you can unpack it with kids is Garlic and the Witch. So there's Garlic and the Vampire, but Garlic and the Witch sort of follows on from that, and it's about Garlic actually growing up as a character and coming into her own. It's a coming of age story. It is understanding and facing your fears and being brave, and a bit like All the Ways to Be Smart, recognizing that you are so much more than what you think you are. And then what's one thing in relation to reading you would like to see parents doing more of with kids? Honestly, I just feel like it's reading with them or reading at the same time as them, because I think a lot of kids don't see their parents reading. And it's different in sort of this bookish space, but I think in general it's a lot rarer to see families carving out time just to sit and read. You do have those families, obviously. I'm not saying that people don't do it, but like literally making time going, okay, I'm going to read my book, or I'm going to read my thing, and you're going to read your thing, and this is going to be time where we read. Because kids need to see adults as readers, and if the only time they see adults as readers is school, then that's all that they associate reading with, and that's a problem. They need to see that people read for lots of different reasons at home. So whether it's a newspaper or it's an ebook or things like that, I don't think it hurts kids to see parents reading on their phone, but like show them, like, this is a book, this is an article, or this is something that I'm reading, just so they get a sense of that. Yeah, because it's one thing to read with your child, but for them to see their parents as readers and to see them value that, it's really powerful. All right, then there's a question about what I would like to see change in the BookTube community, or one thing I'd like to see change in the BookTube community. I have two, Heather. Sorry, I had to put down two because I thought of one and then I thought of another one. One, I would like people to stay in their lane. It is not your place to judge how much someone else reads, whether they read a lot or whether they read a little. It's not our business. It doesn't matter whether they read audiobooks, physical books, ebooks, webcomics, newspapers, articles, whatever. It's not our place to judge or police what people are reading. Yes, there are problematic authors out there, and yes, I think where information is known, we can be aware of that as readers, particularly in an online space. But the fact is, we're all human and we can't catch everything. I'll be honest, if someone's going to talk about J.K. Rowling, I am going to lose my mind, because that information has been out there, it's public, and we know that she is not a great human being. And I think perpetuating that and perpetuating sort of her legacy is an issue. But that's my personal thought. I'm not going to go and attack anyone for it. I'm probably just not going to interact with their content. But if it's a small author that people don't really talk about, who's done something in the past that someone else has talked about but might have been missed, yeah, absolutely, you can let someone know if they're talking about that book. But I think it's a case of, you've got to keep in mind that not everyone is aware or has the time to be aware, or the time to investigate every single author that they're reading. You know, I'm lucky I have a great group of online friends and we all kind of let each other know if we find something out, but we don't find out everything. We can't. We all have lives. So trying as best as you can to stay on top of things, but also recognizing, you know, it's just reading. If something bothers you, you actually don't have to say anything about it. You can just not engage with the content. And in fact, that is often more powerful, because the second you start engaging, you boost videos, you boost comment numbers, you boost all of those sorts of things. So if you have an issue with what someone is doing, honestly, if it doesn't personally affect you, I don't know why people feel the need to get involved. The second thing, and this is just something that's come up recently because I've been watching a whole bunch of TBR videos because it's the start of the month. I don't understand why people talk about having to read things that they're not interested in. No one is making you read it. If you are not interested in reading it, I don't understand why people force themselves to read things. If you are not excited and happy to pick something up, with the exception of things that you might have to read for work or for school or for something, like that's a different kettle of fish. But for your personal reading, if you are picking up things that you don't want to read, and this often happens with people who are picking up giant fantasy books that are 20 years old and they know they're not going to enjoy it, but they're going, no, I have to read it. Who's told you have to read it? Maybe you've made a commitment to a readathon and it doesn't mean you have to read it. Why are you forcing yourself to read things that you don't want to read? I don't understand it. I've talked about the DNF culture before. I've gotten much better at DNFing books. I've also gotten much better at looking at a book and going, do I still want to read this? Yes, I may have bought the book. I may have even bought it 2 months ago. But if I look at it and go, I don't want to read that anymore, I've completely changed my mind. That is okay. Yes, it sucks, financially, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to put myself through reading something I don't want to read. What is the point of that? Like, give yourself some grace. And please, for the love of everything, if you are filming a TBR video and you don't want to read something, do not talk about it in that video, because all you do is perpetuate, I think, a really harmful thing of, oh, I have to read this thing. You don't, and nobody else does either. And then her last question or group of questions is, when did you learn that you were demi, and did it feel like everything finally made sense, or did you not struggle with it at all before realizing there was a label with it? I think it was mostly through lockdown, and because that was around the time I started reading more romance. And I started to see different representations and started to understand, as I said earlier, more of the LGBTQIA plus alphabet. And initially I went, oh, okay, you know what? I actually really can connect with the idea of ace. And then I started reading some books and there was some more representation around demisexual representation. I'm like, oh, do you know what? That actually more closely aligns with how I form relationships with people in general, not just romantic or sexual relationships, but just platonic relationships. I am someone, look, I'm always very polite, but I'm the person who takes a long time to warm up to people. So I can engage in conversation, but typically if you're expecting me to share things about myself and my life and connect in that way, it takes a fairly long time. I'm like, okay, I need to have a relationship with these people. I need to have time to build that relationship with people before I feel comfortable enough around them. So I'm like, okay, well, that label probably fits a little bit more. Currently, I probably, depending on how I'm feeling, swing between the ace and the demisexual label. I love a good spectrum, and I don't think anyone needs to clearly say, this is where I am and I'm staying here, because I think we know that that's not true anymore. As to whether I struggled with it beforehand, oh well, I never really struggled with the label. I think I was really happy when I realized that the fact that I was not at all interested in going out and finding a date or being around someone all the time. I think that made me feel more comfortable recognizing that there's a reason for that. And it's not that I don't want those connections or that I'm not interested in having a relationship. I think, and this is where I sort of swing more into the demi space. I do want those things, but I want them for, I think, different reasons. And so while I probably didn't really struggle with it beforehand, I probably just didn't understand why I didn't want the same things as everyone else around me. And that's just lack of information. And the information has always been there, but I think it has definitely been more accessible, more visible, and more talked about in, say, the last decade, as opposed to when I was growing up as a teen. So it's an interesting one. And I think even as adults, we just need to be open to the fact that, there are going to be times where we don't have the answers and times where we go, oh, well, actually, is this where I fit in? And am I, on this sliding scale from day to day? I think that's okay. And I think everyone's queer journey is their own. I don't think anyone needs to justify anything to anyone else. But yeah, it's been an interesting sort of journey to learn more about that, and in doing so, understand myself a little bit better. Hopefully that answers that question. And that brings us to the end of this Q&A. So it's a long one. Thank you very much. I hope that you enjoyed it and you got some information, or you got to know me a little bit better. As always, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. If I can answer them, I will. Otherwise, if you just want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave any kind of speech bubble emoji down below. I hope that wherever you're on the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.